So we'll go ahead and get started now. So welcome all to our very first Fireside Chat. I'm Rajiv Mehta. I'm LMV class of 2023. Obliged to say, best class ever, thank you. I'm also on the LMV Advisory Council. And so this Fireside Chat is the first of what we hope to be many of these things, organized by our Alumni Engagement Committee, which includes me, and Fiona Walter, who you saw downstairs, Saul over here, Lynn Hansen, and Shamila Shakat. Also, a big thanks to Red Rock and to Jean Belanger, the manager, for allowing us to use this space. So we chose the idea of Fireside Chat because it evokes the idea of a group of friends sitting around a fire, having a good conversation, which allows things to be both informal, but also sometimes deep. It includes a lot of fun and laughter, but also talking about sort of important things, but in an informal way. So hence, that's the goal over here. We also wanted to do this because our community of Mountain View is so rich in people that have sort of deep experience and a lot of passion on a really wide variety of topics. And so we wanted to tap into that and to sort of make these possibilities for all of us to kind of hear about, to engage in, to understand these different ideas that people have and what's going on in our own community. So our speakers to kick off this whole series are Chris Shung, who is LMV class of 2007. Former chief of Mountain View Police Department and currently the undersheriff for San Mateo, and our very own Saul Yeager, who is class of 2012.
Best class ever.
Some of you know he's a captain in the MVPD at the moment. So our topic is deepening police community alignment. And this is so topical these days. We've had over the last few years, impassioned cries for defund the police. We've also had passionate demands for more policing. And so how do you reconcile those views? What do they make sense if all these people are sort of being quite sensible about their thing? It often goes to really fundamental questions of what is policing all about? What purpose does it serve? How do we do it better? And so at the same time as we're going to talk about policing of the community, it's also important to remember that, well, police are people too. They're human beings, they're members of our community, they're family, they're friends, they're neighbors. And honestly, through all this upheaval and conversations about the police, how are they doing? So all this and more will be answered very easily in the next hour or so. So we'll try to wrap up the conversation by 8. We're fine to sit around and talk more. And then finally, at the end of the program, please give us your feedback so we can do a better job of more of those. If you scan the QR code on that thing, it'll bring you up the survey. So we'll remind you of that at the end as well. All right, thank you, and over to Saul.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Normally, I don't need a mic, but I'll do my best to try not to yell into this one. Thanks, Raj. Appreciate the intro, and I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking. Appreciate that. And a big shout out to Red Rock and Jean. I know they're downstairs, so this is really nice of them to open late. And also, if you didn't know they had an elevator, that's also interesting to know. And of course, Chris, thank you for taking the time to come back to Mountain View and talk with us and share with our intimate group. There's supposed to be more. Maybe they'll show up as we go. So we're going to start off with some specific questions for him. And we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. In typical LMV fashion, we'll leave time for Q&A and reflection. Right? And so if you can, write down the questions or remember them for the end. We'll definitely leave time for that. I'm actually going to start a timer for myself for that. Okay. So in the interest of time, we are going to jump right into it. I'm going to speed read Chris's bio because it's like 2 pages long. He's kind of a big deal. So Chris was appointed undersheriff for the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, which is the number 2 position there, not elected, unlike the sheriff, which is elected there, in February of 2023, making history as the first, I'm reading this, I apologize, I didn't memorize it, as the first undersheriff of Asian descent in the history of the office. Prior to that, he was here and he was awesome. And he's still awesome for 28 years. He did a whole bunch of things here. I'm not going to go through them all, but tons of investigative work, tons of SWAT and tactical work, tons and tons of leadership and mentor work, and kind of pushed the PD here and PDs around the world into the 21st century as far as social media, public relations, and communications within it. And today, Chris is a founding board member of The Curve. If you didn't know about this, is a nonprofit formed by Simon Sinek, who he's buddies with, by the way, and other police chiefs and sheriffs from all around the country with the mission, and this is very appropriate for tonight, of providing the most current leadership development and resources to forward-thinking leaders in order to modernize police culture from the inside out. And knowing whether police departments know it or not, they're all doing very similar things that sort of fit into this mold. Some are not, and that's part of the challenge. And a bunch of leadership positions and a bunch of other stuff, and an LMV grad, and a father, and a husband, and a friend, and a mentor, and an all-around a good guy, and gosh, people really like you. So anyway, thanks again. I will be gentle, I promise, but we're gonna jump right into it. So you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, we asked for guitars and banjos, and like the parking for you, Chris, it didn't work out. Anyway, okay, so let's just jump right into this. Can you discuss some of the major challenges facing modern policing, especially in a diverse community like Mountain View, for example, and how affecting policing, sorry, I can't even read my own writing, how are organizations addressing those issues?
So the landscape has changed a lot since COVID and since the summer of George Floyd, right? And we saw that kind of happen. And the phenomenon that I saw was you have the community talking about the police as a monolith. And what we know about policing in America is there's actually like 18,000 police departments in this country. Contrast that with, say, Canada, Great Britain, Australia. Those countries have a national police force. So you can say the police in Canada, and it'll mean, from one end of the coast to the other. Here in the United States, you have 18,000 different police departments. So there is no the police, because policing in Baltimore is very different than policing in Mountain View, which is very different than Sunnyvale or Los Altos. And so what you have is this phenomenon where every police department is a reflection of the community that they serve. You know this because wherever you live, I assume in Mountain View, you know that if someone says, well, Mountain View is just like San Francisco. No, it's not. It's very different. So when we hear Mountain View Police is just like Baltimore Police, well, no, it's not. It's very different. So if I take you back to the summer of George Floyd, a national narrative that swept across the news networks and swept across every social media and narrative, and I think our council members heard it all night long, was the police, the police. And what I saw with the front row seat there was this kind of overgeneralization and almost demonization of the police, which was heartbreaking because by that time I had spent over 20-something years here in Mountain View, and we are so blessed in Mountain View because we have this deep-seated relationship in this community. And by and large, I'll throw this huge bone to LMV. It's because there's been police officers going through LMV since I think 04 or 05, like 2 per class every year. And so we're part of the community is part of us, right? And then to hear some of the things said, not by LMV alumni, of course, but like just the narrative in a council meeting. And were they wrong about those events? No, but those events took place in other parts of the country. Now, fast forward, what's happened is law enforcement has not recovered. There is a huge shortage across the country. Mountain View's, I don't know what the hiring numbers are like now, but I know at the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, we're short 100 deputies, right? 100, and we have like 450 budgeted. And it's no different across the Bay Area and across the country because no one wants to be a police officer or a deputy, right? What's the drawback is the public safety is at risk at that point, right? It's so that's been hard to watch, but slowly but surely, every police department and sheriff's office that I know, they try earnestly to just continue to work those. And Mountain View's path through those difficult times was to not ignore the critics. It was actually to bring them in closer. So we took all of those voices and we knew who they were, and we reached out to them and said, please, let's talk, let's break bread. And internally, the mantra was, we know the natural inclination is to be defensive, is to want to argue, is to say you're right, or I'm right, you're wrong. No, the overall kind of strategy was, let's just talk to each other as humans and learn. And we did. It was a program called MVPDX. I think there's probably up to 3 or 4 or 5 graduating classes now. It's magical to watch people from different spectrums of understanding come together and just kind of have that light bulb go off, both for the officers involved and for the people in the audience or participating. To me, that was like, we need this on a larger scale for society, because if you haven't noticed, society has lost the ability to disagree, right? Everything happens online, and I don't know about you, but I have never, ever, ever seen anyone online change their mind, right? Think about that. A post goes up about any topic, 49% go this way, 49% go that way, they yell at each other, and everyone goes to their corners, right? So as leaders, it's our responsibility to say, to not necessarily go into the tribalism viewpoint, but just say, one of the biggest responsibilities as a leader is to create the space to allow discourse to take place and set the environment, right? And that's what we did here. And I'd like to say, within about a year or two of a lot of that turmoil, relationships got better, people understood. What I started to hear as a chief here was, well, you're different. Thank you. Yes, we knew that. So yeah.
Yeah, good answer. And we also heard a lot of like, well, okay, we know Mountain View's different, but what are you guys doing to do about, or can you teach this across the country? And we're like, no, we're concerned about the hamlet that is Mountain View, and that's about it. So how about technology? Can you talk about how technology has changed the landscape in law enforcement and kind of what innovative things might be being used right now?
It's definitely connected a lot of dots. What's interesting, and I didn't notice it first of all, was the social aspect of people's understanding of technology. So if I were to ask all of you right now, where do you get your information from about how police use technology? If you're being honest, I'm gonna guess it's probably from the last movie or Netflix show that you saw about it, or maybe CSI, right? And we saw this firsthand because I think it was like 2016 or something, we wanted to pilot some facial recognition stuff. It was being offered free at the time. And rightfully so, the community got really concerned back then because we were just like, will this work? Will it not work? And that was a learning lesson for us to go, okay, wait a minute. We can't just arbitrarily deploy technology. We need to also bring our community on board and learn with us, right? And learn what's the best practice. Fast forward to current day, like a lot of what we're doing up in San Mateo County is AI, right? You hear about AI. So AI, if I say that, depending on where your background is, you could probably start freaking out and going, oh no, they're gonna start, arresting people based on what a computer thinks, right? And so to counter that, having the lessons that I learned, one of the organizations I sit on is the International Association of Chiefs of Police on the Human and Civil Rights group. I chair that group. And so this is a national level group. And so we are looking at AI, but we are also looking at the ethical use. And we're not just pulling in police voices, we're actually looking at academia, looking at ethicists, contacting the Department of Justice Civil Rights Group, and their representatives are on there too. Because we can't not use technology, right? I'll give you a good use of technology in an ethical way. In San Mateo County, they looked at a cold case that was solved, right? And so if you feed every single word of a police report into a computer AI and say, who, connect the dots for us and where would you think this would go? And we already know the answer because the human detectives did it. The computer reached the same conclusion in about 3 minutes that it took detectives about 3 months to get to, right? So it's a use case and we sandboxed it, meaning like, we're not gonna let the computer go crazy. We just wanted to know how accurate this was, right? So we're still learning, it's not perfect, but when that question comes up, the questions to ask is, what are the safeguards? What are the rails on the side? What, at the end of the day, do humans make the decision? Yes or no? It should be yes. Should a computer ever point out a suspect to you? No. Should it use facial recognition? No, that's not a best practice anymore. So there's a lot of those types of things that we could definitely go down the rabbit hole if you want. But.
Yeah, write that one down. If you have questions about that. Okay, let's talk about the curve a little bit, if that's okay. So can you tell us about what it is in your role specifically and how the concepts are affecting policing now, and what's Simon like, and what does he eat, and
Sure.
all that cool stuff.
Does everybody know who Simon Sinek is? by chance? Okay.
No.
He is one of those, he's not related to police officers or anything. He is a TED Talk speaker. He's got one of the highest views on leadership. He's written 3 books, starts with Why Leaders Eat Last and Infinite Game. It was actually because of the summer of George Floyd that he does a lot of work with the military, and his background is more like study and like looking at trends and stuff like that in a leadership standpoint. But he started to reach out to a few police chiefs that he knew, and he likes to solve impossible problems. So he's like, somehow I had gotten connected like 2nd or 3rd degree to him, and I had read those books, because here's a full circle kind of moment. If you remember Chief Scott Vermeer, so Chief Vermeer introduced Simon Sinek's first book as a leadership reading material for sergeants when I was testing for that. So I had read that book. So fast forward to a phone call I get from a chief in Colorado. It says, "Hey Chris, I don't know if you've heard of this guy named Simon, but we're all jumping on a Zoom together. Are you interested?" And then after I kind of like picked my mouth up off the floor, of course, right? And that was like 4 years ago. And we had gone, since that time, we meet once a year as a board. We formed a nonprofit. And what do? We recognize that the history of policing is very complicated, right? If you think about culture, policing is like paramilitary, right? You look at military culture, every military branch knows their history, knows the good moments, the bad moments, they learn from it, and it helps them kind of move forward, and they're always adapting. The military is one of the finest institutions in terms of leadership. Policing kind of got there about 50% and didn't follow through, meaning policing, in a broad sense, got all the cool stuff, like, yeah, they like the guns and the uniform and the rank, but they forgot to keep evolving with leadership concepts, right? And also, if you ask most police officers, what's the history of policing? They don't know. They can't tell you. You ask anybody in the military, what's the Army's birthday? Or, what is it? Do you know it? You served?
1776.
Yeah, see? Saul served in the Army. So he knows that, right? So the curve looked at that, and I'll take the 30-second version of the complicated version of history of policing. It's that it bifurcated. So in the northern states, you had, they were based on the English model, right? Sir Robert Peel, the people are the police and the police are the people. They were the night watchmen, right? Were they corrupt? Some of them were, right? They were, paid to look the other way. In the South, you had slave catchers who were kind of legislated, say, go ahead and go after, find slavery, right? And this is a highly abridged version. I actually have articles about this if you want to see this. It'll do it much more justice, but in the interest of time, the Civil War happens. And normally when there's a war, whoever wins, and in this case, we know from history, the North won. Abraham Lincoln becomes president. Abraham Lincoln's second in command, the vice president, was Andrew Jackson. He was a Southern sympathizer. So what should have happened was Northern policing tactics should have kind of swept through the whole country. But Lincoln was assassinated. Andrew Jackson ascends into the presidency, and he kind of looks the other way in terms of, policing styles and tactics. So what you have is what we call the Frankensteining of police history, where you have elements of both. Now, does that mean all Southern police departments in the country right now are racist? No, not at all. It just means that that's part of the history that we should kind of learn from and not repeat, right? So fast forward, what we try to train in the curve is to policing leaders and say, what is the purpose of police? And this is why words matter. We don't use the term law enforcement, because if you tell a new police rookie, you're a law enforcement officer, they're gonna go out and they're gonna enforce the law, right? Police officers do way more than that. And you know that because you've interacted with us at LMV and everything. We care for the community, we spend time with the community. So what we say is words matter. You're not just law enforcement, it's part of what you do. The real purpose of police is to protect the vulnerable from harm. And what does that mean? Of course, it means a victim who's being attacked, we protect that person. But it also means this: if we're chasing a bad guy down the street, we finally catch up to him, and the fight's on, and he is violently fighting us, and we're trying to get him in the handcuffs. The second those handcuffs go on, guess what? He's vulnerable. The purpose of the police is to protect vulnerable from harm, which means you have every responsibility as an officer to protect that person who just tried to kill you. and safely get them the care that they need. Did we see that in George Floyd? No. Did we see that in Tennessee? No. In fact, in Tennessee, when you see the Tyree Nichols case, what I saw there was a culture. When I saw that, I go, that's not the first time that's ever happened in that agency. In fact, I can guarantee you that was a normal occurrence, because that type of behavior doesn't just like come out of nowhere. That's just how they operated. That's a cultural thing. So for us at the Curve, we try to make the case that culture is the path forward for policing, modernizing culture, having this kind of servant mindset, and that the police are really they are no better than the public they serve, right? The warning signs when you put on a uniform and a badge, and we've seen this before with some rookies, they get really puffed up and they're like, yeah, I'm better than everybody. No, you're not, thank you. Good luck in your other career because you're not doing this, right? So that's kind of the nutshell of what we try to do at the Curve, is to empower modern thinking leaders that we do need to change and we need to modernize and really adapt to what society expects of us now.
Yeah, see, he's good. You actually skipped ahead. I had to explain the difference between the law enforcement and policing. And if you notice, we used policing the entire time. Not once did we say law enforcement. That was not that was on purpose. But can you, just real quick, can you kind of touch on the infinite and finite kind of game mindset?
Sure.
I think that's important.
So book 3, Infinite Game, it's basically based on game theory. Simon did not come up with this, but he researched it. So there are infinite games, have a beginning and an end. Think of chess, think of baseball, right? Known factors, known players, there's rules to the game, and it ends. Infinite games, no beginning, no end, the players and the rules change throughout. So in business, wherever your careers are from, or in our case, in policing, is that a finite or an infinite game? It's an infinite game. How are we taught in society? If you went to any leadership courses, it's probably like, you gotta be the best. We're the best at ... That's a finite mindset, because you will never stay the best, because the rules will change, the factors will change, right? So what we tried to do in Mountain View was to teach our leaders infinite mindset, meaning every decision you make is done from a standpoint that things are going to continue to change. You got to be adaptive. You got to be innovative. You have to have a growth mindset. There is no best. If you hear any leader say, we've reached, we're the best in metrics on X, Y, or Z, I'm going to give them a golf clap and go, today you are. Tomorrow might not be the case. Is it more important to have a process and a culture that promotes excellence versus just kind of these metrics? That's why I kind of hate metrics to start with.
Yeah, it's really, I remember one of the things that really stuck in my mind that Chris talked about was, we're never gonna win policing. Like, it's never over. It's like laundry or mowing the lawn. Right? And those are that's how I interpreted it. But that's what he would say, and it makes a lot of sense, and that's based on Simon's work. So yeah, thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Can you share a moment, let's get personal.
Okay.
This is where we're gonna get personal, yeah. Can you share a moment in your career that profoundly impacted you or changed your perspective?
Yes, it actually happened right in front of the street, right here. And so I was a young officer, probably about a year on. I was working for a supervisor, a sergeant, who was very kind of, he had a big ego, and he kind of had that reputation like he just knew everything, right? And I was always taught, in terms of enforcement, we had discretion. For some reason, he was really big on jaywalking here on Castro Street. So I'm like, okay, so I'm doing foot patrol here, just kind of enjoying meeting people in the community. I love Castro Street, right? But for some reason that night he was like, anyone that crosses that red light against the traffic signal, you write them a ticket. I'm like, eh. And so there was these two people, this young couple, I remember, they crossed the street and he ordered me to write that ticket. And I was like, I can't do this. And they were like in tears, they didn't understand. So letter of the law, was it legal? Yes. But it's just like every fiber in me was like, no, that's not right. It's not okay. And so to me as a leader, I was not a leader back then, I was just an officer, but it's like so many lessons learned, right? Just because someone of authority gives you an order, you have to kind of go back to like the legal, moral, ethical thing. I mean, the reason why we give tickets, it's not for revenue, contrary to what you think. It's not to earn toasters, contrary to what you might think. It's to kind of get corrective behavior, right? But in that case, they just walked away with a nightmare contact with officers. right? It was like a half hour of like, they couldn't understand why, what was going on. And so as I got to get promoted through the ranks, that stuck with me forever. Like, it's not that we teach officers to check a box or do this or get the stat, it's that we teach officers values and morals and the reason why we do things, right? We are here for the community, and if it means someone crosses the street and you just pull them aside and go, hey, FYI, that wasn't safe, you almost got run over, I want to make sure you're okay. All right, have a nice night. I think we accomplished the same thing, right? But again, yeah, that still sticks to me to this day.
Yeah, and that actually fits into the duty to intervene stuff around George Floyd and all the other things. And not to anybody that has been through MVPDX knows this, but I'm not going to give. If anybody wants to go through it, let me know. It's a great program, but there is a scenario in there that allows you to feel what that feels like, right? To kind of speak truth to power. Just how do you say no to a sergeant or a supervisor or the police chief? We don't teach that, right? It's a moment. So good.
Can I ask what's MVPDX?
So MVPDX is a program that we started to. It's basically like a community academy, like a citizens academy, except it's turned on its head. It's generally in a community academy, the people that attend it are pro-police. They want to be there. The police speak to the group. They don't speak with them or have conversations. It's like a show and tell. Let me show you the dog. You can put on a vest. It's heavy. Wow, it's in the car, right? It's very cool. We do a little bit of that, but this is more like, what do you want to talk about? We want to, we bring the people that are upset. And it started with George Floyd, and that we actually invited, that's what Chris was talking about earlier, we invited the people who were very concerned about the issues going on, and had a lot of questions and concerns about how do we make this not happen in Mountain View. And we brought them to this program with the whole focus of not convincing them, not trying to change minds, but trying to give them information so that they can change the law if they want to, and help. I mean, basically, we're doing the same thing about helping people, again, how to do it properly. We talk about city council meetings and local government and all of that kind of thing. But it touches a lot of stuff.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's talk about sort of the future. How about emerging threats and some challenges that you see maybe 1, 2 years, 5, 10 years down the road, and what can we do about it?
Fentanyl. Fentanyl is a crazy, highly addictive, super cheap drug to manufacture. The borders are rather porous. The law enforcement agents, I said it, the policing agencies along the border, they're trying their best. But because it is so cheap to produce, and it's so rampant, and the laws are such that it's even if you catch people, they kind of have this revolving door, and it's killing Americans, right? And it's only getting worse. So I just attended a briefing today up in San Francisco, in front of the federal building, where there are police officers, police cars. There are Honduran gangs openly selling fentanyl on the street, right? And so that's where we are, and it is a threat, right, to our safety, our well-being. I know in my time here in Mountain View, we had some tragic deaths of students at our local schools, right? Heartbreaking, because we don't treat those deaths as accidental. We treat those as homicides because a drug dealer or someone supplied something that killed somebody, right? And so that's one of them. And the other threats, I think around the corner, are actually very active right now, are cyber threats, right? China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, every day, if you had the opportunity to sit in the command centers of the federal and local state agencies trying to defend against these attacks, in the thousands by the second, just trying to penetrate. And we see evidence of people kind of snooping on our infrastructure, right? Because the wars, if you look at the wars fought across the planet now, they're not as like battlefield as there's a behind the scenes. The power goes out, the water goes out, right? Things stop working. So those are the threats. So hopefully you sleep well tonight, because I don't want to go too far down a dark hole, but just know that there's actually a lot going on the policing side of that world to counter against that. and very different levels.
That is true. Well, on that same sort of note, how can agencies leverage community partnerships like this and MVPDX and all of the other things that are going on, as well as interagency collaboration to enhance public safety in the coming years?
So it's actually it's the LMV blueprint, believe it or not. It's the ability for any of you to pick up a phone and call the person from the police department who was in your LMV class is the type of blueprint that would have prevented 9/11. And by that I mean 9/11 happened not because the intelligence wasn't there, it was because people weren't talking. People who knew the jigsaw pieces didn't talk. So when you have this relationship with the Mountain View Police and LMV, and you're in all of your sectors, whether you're in education or you're in the grocery stores or you're a small business owner, and you see something and you're like, this doesn't sound right. You know, a lot of people would stop there and maybe not report something, or maybe they don't feel comfortable reporting to the police. But you know what? You do know who is in class of 07, the best class ever, right? And you're gonna call them, hey, I don't know about this, and you have that relationship right away. That's magical, and I wanna impress upon you all, that's unique, very unique to Mountain View. There are leadership fill-in-the-blank cities in other parts of the Bay Area. I've come across many of them. They don't have the same kind of, whatever it is, that kind of glue that holds you all together. And they certainly don't have that same relationship with the city government, with the different parts, with the private sector, public sector, right? So really never forget how awesome that is.
Okay, I have two more questions and then we'll get to audience questions. So back to kind of recruiting. What advice would you give to young people considering a career in policing? And more importantly, what advice would you give the parents and partners of those people that might be, hey, Dad, I think I want to be a police officer?
Wow. That's hard, because I have 4 kids and 2 sons about to go off to college, and not that they wanted to become police officers, but my gut feeling, having been through the last few years, is like, please don't. It's really hard. But it is a noble profession. It is a needed profession, right? And I always have to remind people, it's not what you see on TV. It's not what you see on Netflix or your movies. At the end of the day, when we sit in our interviews across people who want to become police officers or deputies, the number one thing we always hear is, I want to help people, right? And so there's very few careers and professions where you can intersect with someone at the lowest point in their life and turn the course of the ship. And not only turn the course of the ship, but stay with that person. I mean, every single police officer I know has stories, and you will never read about this in the paper or see this on the news, of people they have intersected with, and maybe they open up their wallets, or they take care of a kid, they buy a kid a bike, they keep in touch with that kid. All of us have those kids and the people in the community that we still remember to this day. We don't talk about it. It's not for us to brag about, because that's not a thing, but we change lives, right? And that is awesome. I'll tell you a quick story. Remember when the world was on fire and it was smoky here like every day? So we sent Mountain View officers down to Santa Cruz to help out. So they're directing traffic, and up pulls this CAL FIRE fire truck, and out jumps this firefighter. And at first it's like, whoa, watch out, because we don't trust firefighters. I'm just kidding. But it was a kid from our youth programs that recognized the officer directing traffic. This kid was at risk. He was brought up in a real hard environment, destined maybe for a gang lifestyle, and they hug, there's tears, and it's like the relationship with the SROs at that time made the difference to go, you know, there's life beyond high school. And because of that, even though he decided to become a firefighter, it's still noble. And I mean, that's what it's about, right? But here's the problem. No one writes those stories. And imagine how we felt when not only did we hear defund the police, but also kick the SROs out of the schools.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, I get that there's some schools in this country where you got officers frisking kids or whatever. I go, that's not Mountain View. If you spent a minute in any of the Mountain View schools, you would know that they had personal relationships, all of them, right? And so, yeah, I get a little passionate about that.
Yeah, that actually, just a little anecdotal thing here. The SRO, I'm going to talk about Brother Bill for a second. We were very hurt by that whole SRO, trying to pull the SRO thing out of our school specifically. One, because it's a specialty position for us. It's like a detective. They have to test for it. They have to have shown interest for it. It's not an overtime position like I had to work 8 hours at Crittenden or whatever. It's a passionate position that has to have the right people in it, and they have to test for it and go through an entire process. And we had an officer. We've also had the program for, I want to say, almost 50 years.
Oh, yeah.
So it wasn't something that was a brand new thing for us. And one of the stories that I found most touching was one of our very, very long time SROs in school. I think it was a youth. It wasn't even an SRO thing. It was like youth officer or something like that. So well known and made such an impact in so many people's lives that when he passed, which was maybe 5 or 6 years, maybe more than that now, there were kids that were 60 years old, kids, that showed up for the funeral, that still had connections with him, and a lot, not like 1 or 2, but like 30 or 40, and they brought their families. So it was hard to not be defensive when people were talking about that specifically, because that is a nugget for the Mountain View Police Department specifically that we love. We love that program. So, okay, one more.
So can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
A recent brand new SRO is Julie Leopold, formerly Julie Rodriguez.
Yes.
I'm looking at Sarah nodding her head. A mom who came through all of our schools, who sent 4 kids through our schools. She's been with PD for 6 years, and she just got an SRO spot, and she's so excited. Yeah, she's gonna be a Graham. She's so excited.
Yeah, and she had to test for that, right? And that was one of the
Yeah.
stories she brought up, the knowledge of this and the passion. And just so you know, as much as she seems like a slam dunk for that position, there were 3 others that were just as good, right? I mean, we chose her ultimately, but I mean, they all had very passionate stories, and I mean, I'm super proud of this department, so we're all awesome. Okay, one more question that I have for you that's, again, back to the personal thing a little bit, but how do you balance, you talked about the awful things we see, because we do, but how do you personally balance the demands of the job with a personal life and the demands that you have with your family?
So when I was here and we hired them or we promoted them, the first thing I would tell them is, your family comes first. Right? This place comes second. There will be demands. There will be times when your cell phone will go off and you have to come in. I get it, and you will, and I thank you for that. But absent that, if you have an option, you pick your family. And I would go into the police academies and tell the recruits this, because if things are good at home, things are generally good at work. If things are not good at home, things are not going to be good at work. And that's what we go by, because this job, what you see some terrible things. I mean, there is no such thing as a police officer who is not haunted by the things that they've been exposed to, right? And for me, I have 4 kids, right? And so when the twins started driving last year, I'm surprised I survived that, but like, I can vividly flash to every single fatal car accident that I've responded to with teenagers, right? So you can imagine it's hard for cops to become like helicopter parents, right? You get more lawnmower parents sometimes, but that's why I put that emphasis. And I know the culture at Mountain View PD was, if you need time off, we will do whatever we can, right, to make that happen, just because your family, is the priority. And if they're stable there, the community benefits, right? No one wants a grouchy cop because they're just in a really bad place mentally, physically, spiritually, whatever.
And I can tell you, just before we break it into questions, the average person, this is based on research, but the average person in the United States sees about anywhere from 3 to 5 incidents that may rise to the level of PTSD in their life, right? That doesn't mean it will, right? But that just means that you may be exposed to 3 to 5 things that have the potential to cause PTSD. Police officers in a 20-year career, how many years have you served so far?
28.
28, right? I'm at 22. So in a 20-year career, on average, 300. So cops because nobody calls the cops to say, hey, I'm so proud of my daughter, son. Can we, we'd hang up on them anyway. A 911 dispatcher would be like, that's not a 911 call. They call us when the most awful thing is happening and when they don't know what to do, right? And we're thrust into those situations often, every day. right? So just keep that in mind. Okay, so with that positive note, any questions on anything?
Yep.
Shoot.
Something we've noticed just in the past couple of weeks is that at Walmart, they're getting rid of self-check because apparently they're getting too much, what do they call it, shrinkage, loss. Is that indicative of any trend that you're aware of that would, is causing them to do that?
Well, there's the organized retail theft trend, and all roads on that one lead back to Prop 47. And I can be more vocal now because I'm not working here. But and here's the hard part: you can have organized retail theft task forces, and we can arrest them every day, and they will get let out with a ticket a couple hours later, and they go right back to it. So we actually saw trends where people would commute to different parts of the Bay Area, just go into like Stanford Shopping Center, do some shopping at Coach and Burberry and all those places, and walk out. And because of the way Prop 47 is structured, very little penalties, if anything. It's a property crime. The stores, the retail stores have made their strategic, and I can't speak for all of them because it depends, but they're of the mindset to not intervene or not prosecuting. So there's a lot of frustration across the board. So there's a lot of efforts right now underway through the sheriff's organizations to really change and at least amend Prop 47 to allow for some teeth to actually kind of take hold. Of course, with everything political, there's a lot of kind of, from any sides of any issue, there's a lot of noise. But at the end of the day, it's just really hard to put a dent in it if nothing's gonna happen. The crooks know this. Nothing's gonna happen.
Can you remind us what Prop 47 is? There's always so many propositions,
Sure.
it's hard to keep
It kind
track
of,
what they all are.
it made a lot of felonies into misdemeanors, and it changed the dollar threshold of crimes, either up or down, kind of in the, as you could say, in a simple way, in the favor of the crooks, right? What was also meant to happen as part of that was, because there's this cycle of theft with drug addictions and everything, it was well intentioned. The backside of 47 was supposed to have social services to provide care and treatment for the drug issues. That never came, right? So it kind of, the cycle didn't complete. You let a lot of people out who should have then been directed to treatment programs who didn't get it. There's no funding. And so they're out on the street. What are they going to do to support their habit? They're going to go right back to what they know. So what I see in my jurisdiction is they ride BART, they get off at Millbrae because it's the end of the line, they go into Walgreens, take whatever they want, cosmetics, whatever, in bulk, get back on BART, go into San Francisco, sell it to a fence operation who then repackages it and sends it off to other third world countries. They get their money, they get their drug fix, and then they commute back again the next day. Right? So that's a pattern. So it's really, really difficult.
Yeah, the big thing on that too is what Chris touched on, is the why. Like, why are people stealing things? Why do people steal a car? And when you get that, then you can begin to kind of do a root cause analysis, right, and solve the problem. But there's a whole bunch of political things and terms and things that go into, like term limits is what I'm talking about, and things that go into that reasoning. But from our side, it's sad when you talked about shrink. So shrink is the amount of money that, if people don't know what that term means, in the retail world, what they expect to lose from, things that break, but also theft. And the shrink numbers that have been acceptable in the retail space have gone up like quite a bit. It used to be a certain amount for certain stores. Now it's up in the billions of dollars for big corporations like Walmart and Best Buy and things like that. Good question. Any? Okay.
So you started talking about the narrative and how people refer to police in the U.S. and there's a need to change it. And I know, at least in Mountain, you're doing different things with Coven and DX. But what about the nation? Is there do police departments across the nation realize this is a problem? And is there some, even though it's not a central thing and every U.S. police department works differently, but is there a need for police to unify at some level to address this narrative at a national level?
Some do, some put their head in the sand, some don't care. It all depends on what part of the country. There is if you did a Google search on Simon Sinek Law of Diffusion of Innovation, he draws this bell curve. And this is where the term the curve came from. So on any idea, if you want mass adoption of an idea, we used to be raised to think that you had to convince the middle of the curve, the majority of an idea, before you could change it. What research has actually found is the first couple percent, those are your innovators, right? And he describes it as these are people who will stand in line for a Star Wars movie 24 hours when you can buy the same, buy a ticket and go see it a week later. And then there's the early adopters, right? That's like 12%. And so what research has found in any idea, any organization for mass adoption is you just need to convince that group. And then the middle of the curve will start to look over their shoulder and go, they're onto something, because we want more of that. So that's what we've done at the curve, is to try to identify who those early adopters and innovators are and focus all of our effort there. It's funny, because how does that sound in marketing? When Simon markets this, he actually doesn't go, everyone should come to this training. He's like, he'll start with, this training is not for you. This training is not for everybody. We're only interested in people who want to make some change, right? And happy to turn away. And he even told me once, he goes, after you give a presentation at a conference, about 10% of the people are really your early adopters, innovators. And sure enough, you give the talk, about 10% of the crowd comes up at the end, and they're handing you the business cards. I want to learn more. Perfect. We'll just keep doing that, and then just keep growing. And now you have a movement, right? So that's kind of how we're approaching it.
There's some psychology behind,
Oh, yeah.
this isn't for you. Anybody? You.
Yeah, so it's very heartening to hear your perspective, both of you, and what we see in Mountain View. And on the other hand, what I read in the paper is that some police departments in the region are still dealing with racist practices, racist cops, and you may have described how you changed that practice, but can you say more about how police can police themselves?
It really is culture, right? That's the roadmap. It goes back to, when is it okay to do X, right? Especially when no one's looking. So if the leaders at the top don't model that, and it has to be like, you almost have to keep talking about culture. If you're a leader or a CEO, you almost have to talk about it every day, in every meeting, and you keep washing it over, that what's acceptable, what's not, right? And this goes from hiring practices to training practices to internal affairs when you investigate someone, all these things. If in your recruiting you ask very benign questions and then just like, anybody can pass this, that's a problem, right? So we would, in Mountain View, we would anyone who wanted to be an assessor had to sit down with leadership at the police department and go, okay, this is what we're looking for, right? We're not looking for people that think like you, whoever you are on the board. We're looking for a wide variety of background experience, which is ironic. If you look at police academies, this is what we're trying to change too. You hire for diversity, right? We've got this great pool of people. You put them all in an academy class. What do? What does every police academy in America do? They shave their heads, they scream at them, and they punish them for being individuals. Punish them for speaking out or being out of turn. We're trying to change that, right? Because I get it, it's done for discipline, but at the same time, and some police departments, after they graduate from the academy, they just do it even more. They indoctrinate the recruit into what's acceptable, what's not. You see hazing practices, right? That type of practice creates this culture of don't cross that thin blue line. Whereas, like here at Mountain View, we visit them in the academy, we go, hey, is everything okay? We talk about the family and everything, and then they graduate, they go through the training program. How do you learn? Are you a visual learner? Are you a kinesthetic learner? Right? And we go deep into that. And then, the leadership, they hear from the leadership, like, if things are not good, you need to talk about it. It's okay to say that something's not right, call it out, right? So that's culture, and that has to be modeled throughout every step, from the line level supervisor to the middle manager to the top. Is it easy? No, because there's constant attrition, there's constant retirements, and you're always behind because you're always kind of retraining. But the best roadmap I've seen is culture, right? That culture, if you look at any of those police departments, you read your paper, I can go off in the soapbox on papers. It's not always what you read. There's always generally more to it than that. But when there's like the hallmark moment that you see some scandal in a police department, I would challenge you, look at what the culture of that place is like, right? If you look at Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, he was like written up 17 or 18 times, and he was given the role of training new recruits. There's something really wrong with that picture, right? So something was going to happen. So as leaders, it's our responsibility to look at things like that and break that cycle, and look at personalities and egos, and break those cycles, and just basically kind of approach, it's even teaching our supervisors how to have really hard conversations. I hate to say this, but we as a society do not do a good job of teaching our kids how to have difficult conversations, right? And then they grow up and they go into the workforce, and we don't do anything in any sector to teach them how to have difficult conversations. And so in a police world, when you have a supervisor who can't have a difficult conversation because they were given a trophy for everything they ever did in life, right? We have to teach them, here's how you have a difficult conversation, because that act of courage to be uncomfortable and to call someone out and hold them accountable could save their career down the road, could save the department, could save the community, right? So.
Are you finding that there are more young people wanting to join police departments like yours compared to
Pittsburgh.
compared to some others that
Just
are
kidding.
more
I was just
have a more old-fashioned approach?
Can I want to take a stab at one other thing that he mentioned. So I've had the honor of being Chris's second in command for a little bit of time, but I've worked for him my entire career. Like he was always my boss, like all through every single promotion, and I've caused him a lot of problems. But one of the things that I'm most proud of is I realized probably later in our relationship that I was very good at being his anger translator. If anybody's seen Key and Peele, and what he's saying is, a lot of times with these racist cops or cops that are causing problems, they need to be fired. That's the problem, right? And there's issues with that. That seems like a very simple solution. It's not as easy as it sounds, right? Because there's unions and there's other things that have been portrayed in the media as being very difficult to work with. But on a culture standpoint, the people that allow that behavior to happen, the supervisors and the peers, whether it's racism or planting evidence or whatever else, excessive use of force, it's the thing, everybody around that person that allows that to continue to happen, that also needs to be talked to, get in trouble, written up, fired, I don't know, right? Depends. Because anything that you allow, you condone as a department. And that starts with leadership at the top, which sounds draconian a little bit, but the best way to deal with a racist cop is to not make them a cop anymore, if it's true, right? And we also deserve protections, just like everybody else. But if it is a problem and it's true, and you have an issue like Derek Chauvin with use of force, for example, 17, 18 times, the argument about, well, I work in a violent crime task force, every single person I contact has a gun. Those numbers still don't match that, if you know that argument, if anybody's ever heard that, right? So there's issues with that. So I just wanted to put, he was being very nice. Let me hit this one real quick. So you're talking about recruiting, how are people attracted to kind of like good agencies like ours versus Pittsburgh, which happens to be a pretty good department. They've got a lot of problems in the East Bay and that area. We're having trouble recruiting too, quite honestly. We pay a lot. It's hard to live here. There's some just logistical things that don't work out. The pool of candidates, when I got hired, I believe there was about 800 for 6 positions. It was very, very competitive, and a lot of agencies have not grown out of the, hey, we're just, you know what, I got a great recruiting idea, Chief. We're gonna put out a thing that says we're hiring and people will come. Those days are gone, because what I always talk about is that we don't really have a recruiting problem, we have an attraction problem, right? There are people that want to be cops no matter what. We don't want like 90% of them, at least in Mountain View, right? And that's the issue, is how do you weed through this group? How do you find the 2 or 3 that are really great people? Maybe they don't even know they want to be cops yet. That's a clue that we talk to our recruiting team all the time. You know, we've been pushing forever, why don't we go talk to the colleges? This is something that he does, but not administration of justice and criminal justice departments. That's an easy win. They already want to be police officers. We don't need to convince them. What we need to talk to is maybe the social justice groups, maybe the history majors. What about sports teams, right? Even if in a department like Mountain View, we have 100 cops about, If we get 1 or 2, that's great. We're not hiring 100, right? And guess what? People from Stanford, we have people with incredibly great degrees from incredibly great schools that work in Mountain View, right? We have professional athletes that work in Mountain View. So it's attracting the right people to come, I think, is the bigger problem, but a lot of police departments are having trouble even sort of understanding that concept.
I'm curious, it sounds very progressive, the approach that you take. And so I wonder whether your national group has enough representation from the red state, from Texas, from some of the
Yeah, if there was a heat map right now, the board members, 2 in Colorado, 3 in Texas, like Irving, Texas, Fort Worth, Texas. And these are like very forward-thinking.
I was
So
just
yeah,
there this
yeah.
weekend. Okay.
So there are. I mean, I could tell you like all across the country, but we have some in Florida. So I think I'm the only California, although there's a lot of interest now in California that we're trying to bring people on board.
It also, just for demographic purposes, the big police departments like LA or New York or whatever, any of the huge ones, there's less of those. The majority of police departments in the United States are small to medium size. Those are the majority, people forget that, right? So we, little guys, have a lot of influence in a lot of what's going on, but you see the big departments kind of screwing things up, to be very frank. And that is maybe, I don't want to put like reasons, but they hire hundreds at a time because there'll be 100 deputies, 100 officers, 200 officers short, right? And if you go back in time, even San Jose, right? San Jose is pretty large. There's times when they've been down 400 at a time, right? Some of it was layoffs and their own fault, but the numbers kind of mean something as well.
Chris, I just love the way you started with the policing across how it started, history of it, and national, and then finally you kind of nicely brought it back to Mountain View. So I was thinking about that you can take Chris out of Mountain View, but you cannot take Mountain View out of Chris, stays here. So I have a lot of questions, but one of major concern is about AI. And what is about AI, how we can help our PD to get the most correct or diverse data to feed to AI to get the answers we're looking for, or something, because AI depends on what kind of data you feed into that.
That's a hard one because there's so many types of AI, right? Very, very different types of AI. From like what Jamil could help out the most with is probably listen for the narratives that's happening, right? The best thing that you could do, and I can say this because I'm not here anymore, is support Chief Canfield, or if they've done their research and they're trying to come up with this is our solution, and it goes before council, what you're going to hear is different voices of, and typically what you'll hear is the national narrative concerns, right? And with your reach and your relationship with council, it's like, hold on, can we make sure that we're talking specifically about the right kind of AI? Is this a national argument, or are we really talking about the type of tool that Chief Canfield is looking for, and have they done their, ask the questions. Has Mountain View PD done their homework? Is there a legal and ethical basis for this? Are they following best practices? If they are, then we should support it, right? There's organizations out there that put out white papers on policy on using AI. Just kind of educating the decision makers, that's helpful. But when you hear rhetoric and it's like, well, in Boston they did this, or in Los Angeles this nightmare thing happened. Okay, that's a major city. I can't speak to that. Turn it back around and go, well, how does that affect us here in Mountain View?
And also with any technology, she's going to be next, sorry. With any technology, I know it's Aid. Hold us to it as well. Ask those questions, right? Don't accept hey, look, just trust us. We want to say that because you probably can. With Mountain View, you can probably trust that we're trying to do the best with what we have and pilot things and attempt to use different stuff to basically keep everybody safer, to do our job better, be more efficient. But don't accept that. Please hold us to task. Ask those questions, right? Ask the hard questions. And I can tell you, confidently that in a lot of these especially the technology ones, the groups and teams that we have working on them are already looking at these things. They're looking at ethics, they're looking at privacy rights and a lot of the things that people would be concerned about, but ask. Don't just assume. Okay.
And I'll let you in on a secret. There are some serious geeks at Mountain View PD with like data and computer and CS type backgrounds. So you won't tell because you see the uniform, but there's some pretty hardcore geeks in there.
I just wanted to ask a little bit about what training and what's going on in terms of dealing with mental health issues that more police are having to confront but don't necessarily have the training.
That's more. Yeah, I can run with that. So never before have we been asked to do more than just police. Like there was a retired guy that came back and was talking to me, and he said, when I was hired, we were security guards. That's what we did, right? We went into bars, we threw people out. It was very physical, right? And they recruited for that. They were looking for people from the military, and these kind of things, right? And there's still a piece of that. We still need to do those kind of things sometimes we're asked to do. But never have I seen the change in, sometimes we're a counselor. Sometimes we have a 25-year-old police officer counseling a couple that's been married for 30 years, right? On how to bring up their kid, and this officer doesn't have kids. Like, it's this weird thing that happens, but they trust them, right? They trust the officer. It's hilarious to me. But, so with the mental health world, that's a whole new thing too, sort of. Like, we've been dealing and working through issues with people having mental health issues or suffering from specific diagnosed maybe problems or things for a long time. I'm not sure why it seems like there's more now. There's been issues in the 80s when the mental health housing changed and people were let out and became a prison issue, right? There's a lot of history behind some of this stuff. But as far as the training goes, there's mandated training now by police officer standard of training for California Post, that officers in the academy begin to get mental health training. They understand, both internally and externally, by the way, so they understand how people react to things, and sometimes it's better to back away, basic kind of stuff, right? How to maybe recognize somebody is not under the influence of something, but is suffering from autism, for example, right? It can look the same if you don't know what you're talking about, and officers can make it worse sometimes. But sometimes it looks the same as somebody who's also on drugs, and we need to do something, so it's hard. In Mountain View specifically, I can't talk much about generally, but I can tell you that we spend a lot of time and money on training and having our own behavioral services unit, which is one of our community service officers that put herself through the MFT LPCC licensing work and is a associate license. She's still trying to get hours, so if anybody knows anybody, she needs hours. But that actually works externally only, to actually follow up and triage with any person that might be having some kind of issue to get them connected to the right services. That's not unique to Mountain View. That type of multidisciplinary approach is being worked out through a lot of different places. There's the Cahoots model in Oregon, and there's a bunch of other models. But we also have a lot of officers all of our officers are CIT trained, so crisis intervention training. I'd like to say 100%. We have new people that we need to get to training, so it's almost never 100%. But we have a very, very high percentage of they're all trained to that level. And then we actually have 15 people on our C&T team now. So we have 15 people that are on our what used to be called the hostage negotiation team. I've been on the team for 20 years, and we've never had a hostage situation. So it's called the crisis negotiation team now in C&T. And they're regular patrol officers, and there's 2 on every shift, as best as we can schedule that are there to respond to any sort of crisis. And they do. There's a lot. And again, that's something you don't read about, right? But that could be a barricaded person just doesn't want to come out of the house. Or it could be something really awful, right? I mean, not that that's not awful, but worse than that.
Thank you.
Oh, we have to wrap it up now. Okay. Can we do one more, Brian? He's kind of a big deal, too. Okay.
You mentioned earlier about the things that you never hear about, the officer buying a kid a bike or something like that. So I just wanted to share one L&B story, and that was 2 officers had a class project, and their project was, somehow they identified 2 at-risk children. So I guess you have a program where you're looking at, you know, who might be leaning towards a gang or whatever. And their project was with these 2 young girls. They found homes in Mountain View, and we've all seen them, right? Fruit trees just full, they're not picking them, and the fruit's rotting on the ground. And so they went and they picked oranges and lemons and whatever, and then they took that to CSA, and part of it, the project was they had to be at the booth at CSA and see the people coming in and giving them the fruit. So great project, and that was how it was formed, and that they met all the requirements. But they decided to take the 2 at-risk children to lunch to thank them for helping them. You know, like, well, that's step 1. Well, when they were walking down Castro Street after lunch, one of the girls said, "Oh, can we go in the East West Bookshop?" And I guess they liked it, but they, you know, weren't used to doing that kind of thing, or I don't know. And they said, sure. So they walked in, and somehow the 2 girls got separated from the police officers, and all of a sudden one of them hears somebody at the front desk saying, "Hey, you're not allowed in here unless you have a parent." And one of the officers said, "I'm the parent." So besides you teaching your officers to lie, I just thought, just think of the impact of those kids having that whole experience, but then having the officers stand up for them in a situation that was maybe not racial, I don't know, but you know, being targeted for being young or how they looked or whatever. So I wanted to just share, you know, I've had several things in LMD that have touched me. That one is one of the stories I wanted to share.
Thank you. I have a complimentary story of, this was during the time when they were trying to kick out the SROs. And I won't say which school it was, but there was a youth who had behavioral issues. I mean, she was known in the school just acting out. And so a teacher saw the officer, the SRO, show up and walking with that girl. And so that teacher kind of made the incorrect assumption that, oh, you're here to, you know, you shouldn't be here, and, you know, this is not the right role. Well, the backstory is the teachers couldn't control the kid, the principal couldn't control the kid. They asked the kid to try to calm down, and the one person that the kid asked for was the officer. And that officer came, and the officer calmed her down, walked her out, and just kind of took care of her, right? And so it's a great story to end on, because it's like, you know, what you see in an interaction between an officer and someone else is largely influenced by the biases. We all have biases of what we've, up to that point in life, been exposed to, whether it's generally TV shows, media, whatever, what you read in the newspaper. But there's generally a lot more going on, and so I'll leave you with that.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you all for coming, and Chris, thank you very much. Oh yeah, hit that QR code. This is for $19.99 today only. If you guys can please give us feedback on the survey, that would be very, very helpful. All you got to do is take a picture with your phone. Did I miss anything? Okay. All right. Have a great night. Drive safe.
So,
All right.